good morning and warami. Welcome to our Culture Forum on the topic of openness and engagement. I'm Tim Sapomasan from the Culture Strategy team, and I begin by acknowledging that I'm coming to you today from land Gadigal people and acknowledge them as the traditional owners, acknowledge that we're gathered online from the lands of various traditional owners today. And in the spirit of reconciliation, Yini Nalawungan Murray Budjari Gadinanada, which is my attempt to acknowledge country in Gadigal language. This is the fourth Culture Forum this year, and it coincides, of course, with the upcoming conclusion of National Reconciliation Week. The university has had a number of events this week to mark the occasion and to explore this year's theme of all in this together. We wanted this Culture Forum series, by the way, to allow members of the university community to come together and reflect on our values, our purpose, and other issues relating to our institution's culture. And today's forum focuses on the values of openness and engagement, which sit alongside respect and integrity, diversity and inclusion, and courage and creativity in making up our university's values. We've chosen, though, to focus on openness and engagement for the following reason, namely issues concerning Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are often framed in terms of diversity and inclusion. It's important, of course, for us to continue to increase the representation of those communities in our student and staff populations. But in order to do so, we need to bring a number of things, not least open minds and an ability to listen. We need, in other words, to live up and live the values of openness and engagement. How, though, do we cultivate these values, habits and practices? And how should we as a university contribute to public conversations and community action concerning reconciliation? These are big questions, but today we've got a great panel to help us answer those questions. We have joining us Professor Jaky Troy, who is the Director of Indigenous Research in the Research Portfolio and also a linguist in the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. Also joining us is Harte, Director of Indigenous External Relationship Development in the Indigenous Strategy and Services Portfolio. Vita Christie is joining us too. She's Manager of the Posh Centre for Indigenous Health in the Faculty of Medicine and Health. And finally, we have Professor Simon Bronitt, who is the Dean and Head of School at the Sydney Law School. With that, let's open up the forum. And I might just turn to you first, Jaky. As we've been celebrating National Reconciliation Week, or marking it this week, we've learnt news, of course, of the destruction of a significant Aboriginal cultural heritage site at Juukan Gorge in Western Australia by Rio Tinto, a site that goes back some 46,000 years. Just about everyone I've spoken to the past few days finds this shocking and think it amounts to a significant cultural loss for Australia. How do you think we as a university community should be responding to that, Jaky? I mean, we talk about engagement. How should we engage on this particular issue?
I think we should engage. I think that's the key thing. Shock horror is a very good response. This is a loss not only for the Putu, Kunti, Kurama traditional owners of the Pilbara, it's also a loss for the whole world. It was an act of terrorism. There's no two ways about it. I'm convinced that Rio Tinto did it to show the traditional owners what they can do. It's equivalent to when the United States bombed Hiroshima to show Japan that it needed to get out of the war. In World War II, it's like the Taliban, as other people have commented as well, blowing up the Bamiyan Buddhas, saying, look, we will do what we want to do. We will stop at nothing to get what we want. Is this really what Australia wants at the moment? I noticed an early Slido comment coming up on the system there about why are Aboriginal people feeling afraid to go outside during the COVID-19 restrictions? And many people are just afraid they will be arrested. Aboriginal people have said to me in a range of forums at the university and outside, friends, they've told me about family members who've been arrested and fined $1,000 for going fishing together in a very remote place. I saw one mock-up on Facebook where people had put a dummy person fishing on a very empty beach with the police striding up to them and about to arrest them. And when they realised it was a dummy, they were slightly horrified, but they were filmed doing, it's not that different to what's going on in the United States. But what should we as a university community do? I think we should rally together. We have an Indigenous research strategy at the University of Sydney, led by the Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Indigenous Strategy and Services, and the Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Research. I'm running a hub, an Indigenous research hub. It's a powerhouse, a place for us to have these conversations. It's an all-of-university effort. We have the wonderful Poach Centre at Sydney University looking at Indigenous health and well-being. We as a research community are asking the big questions and looking for answers about how we can really come together as a country and what reconciliation really means. Reconciliation means to reconcile. It also means to console. So I would like to console the Putu, Kunti, Kurama traditional owners with the knowledge that Sydney University backs you all in this time of mourning for loss of all your ancestors who are living in that gorge. In an Aboriginal cosmology, we believe that the past and the present are married up permanently. So when that gorge was blown up and all that place was destroyed, the ancestors of those people were destroyed along with it. Their cultural home is gone. 46,000 years of continuous connection, at least 46,000 years.
Well, thank you, Jaky, and we might come back to that later on in the discussion. It'd be good to get other panelists' views on the Juukan Gorge issue. But there's been another issue that's dominated headlines the past few days, and that's, of course, the Black Lives Matter protests following the death of George Floyd at the hands of police in Minneapolis in the US. And many people here in Australia are drawing parallels with the experience of Aboriginal people with respect to incarceration and in the law and justice system. Simon Bronitt, can I bring you in on this issue? Obviously, we have a history and ongoing recurrence of Aboriginal deaths in custody. We know as well there's a disproportionate level of Aboriginal people who are incarcerated in Australia. How do you think we should be engaging on this issue as a university community? And do you draw those parallels between what's happening in the US and what happens here in Australia yourself?
Thanks, Tim. I think along with everyone who's watched that footage, we are appalled and deeply concerned about the techniques of policing that are applied. It goes against everything that civilised and humane society should have. And I think what was extraordinary about that interaction was that so much of the dynamic that is that results in often violent arrests is the resistance to police authority. Concept of police legitimacy rests on the consent of the governed, and you can see increasingly the riots in America in reaction is that the governed are not consenting to policing anymore. And in Australia, turning it to Australia, you've seen pockets of situations where this has happened. Palm Island comes to mind in Queensland, which arose out of an interaction between a police officer and an individual who was a bystander to an interaction with police, and the police responded to that intervention with an arrest that ultimately led to a death in custody, and then the rioting, and then years later, after subsequent inquiries, compensation for the whole community. We know that landmark case has received a fair amount of publicity. But what often gets overlooked is that at the heart of a lot of the interactions that result in incarceration and therefore increased risk of death, particularly for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, is it is often offensive language charges and unnecessary arrests. Arrest should be a matter of last resort. people resist what they believe to be an unfair and often is unlawful arrest. Police officers have discretion in how they use their powers. And I remain concerned that people are often being arrested for swearing in public. And often the swearing is unconscious or inadvertent. It isn't in the nature of a violent act. And it is quite unusual to have swearing as an offence in a country like Australia, to be perfectly honest. Even in the UK, which I would say is a much more polite society where I'm from, swearing is not a crime. It has to be linked to inciting violence. Here, offensive language, offensive conduct is a crime, and that gives enormous discretion to police. And going back to the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody in the late 80s, one of the recommendations, which has been ignored, was the decriminalisation of offensive language. It shouldn't be a crime, unless it's about inciting acts of violence or, dare I say it, racially vilifying. I'd like to see a little bit more prosecution of offensive language when it is racially vilifying, but just swearing in the context of an interaction, often where the police are swearing at the individual who's being stopped and questioned or searched, which leads to the escalation of the interaction and an inevitable assault police and an arrest and an incarceration. We have to tackle the structure of that engagement. And I have to say, it is underlying a lot of the engagement in the United States. You can see that a lot of black deaths in custody arise through suspects resisting authority, showing contempt of cop is essentially what they're being dealt with. They are resisting the over-policing on the streets, and this sets up this pattern of repression that often leads to death.
Thank you, Simon. And someone in the audience has just made a note about sound, so we're just going to try our best to fix that up. Vita Christie, can I bring you in? And you at the Posh and your colleagues at the Posh Centre work to improve health services for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We hear a lot about the social determinants of health, of course. Do people's experience of policing and power count as one of those social determinants of health? Is there a connection, in other words, between what people experience when they have dealings with police and law and justice and their well-being and physical and mental health?
I think, of course. I mean, it's part of a social system. It's therefore a social determinant. I think that social determinants kind of sit far and wide and affect health directly. And it's great that that's really part of the common parlance these days because I think that's the whole point of, when we're talking about systemic racism, there are systems that we have within our society and that they are so, the racism can be so ingrained that it sort of, all of it can trickle out to lots of areas, but justice definitely and the law definitely. I mean, just talking about the George Lord situation, the David Dungay's family has come out and sort of said that, talked about the similarities and the fact that he asked 12 times, he said 12 times, I can't breathe, before he died. So, yeah, it's a sort of a scary similarity to have. But perhaps one that is great that it's on, a really large stage at the moment. And we really do need to be making those parallels with Australia.
Thanks, Vita. And now can I bring you in, Liam, and making sense of these developments in society, our work at the university. I know that in the Indigenous Strategy and Services portfolio, there's the unfinished business action plan that you're currently pursuing. Can you shed some light on the sort of work that's going on there, and give us a sense of how people in the portfolio are making sense of what's happening outside and what we can do as a university community in engaging with these issues.
Yeah, look, so it is an interesting time. In regards to the strategy, that's moving forward from the Wingaramura strategy of 2012, and moving into unfinished business is exactly that. For this final year, it's about closing out any of that unfinished business and setting the foundations for the next strategy. So what that next strategy around the One City, Many People, we'll be doing the workshops very shortly, and that's where we're really wanting to engage in the uni to start to get that narrative and be a part of what our strategy as a university will be moving forward, and you know, how do we make Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander business everybody's business? The current events, look, that it's still being digested and trying to be understood by a couple of us. But yeah, it will be important times, and I think it will influence the workshops as to what sort of a university we want to be moving forward.
Thanks, Liam. And these are, of course, extraordinary times in which we are all working. Given the COVID-19 pandemic, we know that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are among some of the groups that are considered high risk with respect to the pandemic. Liam, if I can just ask you to give us a sense of how the university has been factoring this into its work and its planning. Is this something that has been discussed among you and your colleagues in the portfolio?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, one of the biggest pieces is our service learning in Indigenous communities. Very early on, we had to discuss with those communities how we would engage with them moving forward. A lot of the communities started to shut down to outside visitors, but it also gave us the opportunity to re-engage with our local Aboriginal communities, and we were quite fortunate to work with Redfern community to be able to re-engage and work on projects. So moving forward, as things start to reopen, we'll start to re-engage and start to get back out into those communities. So again, respecting their wishes around being accessible to the community.
And Vita, what are you picking up at the Post Centre? Is this similar to your experiences and the mood that you're picking up?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, you know, the Aboriginal Health and Medical Research Centre sent out, when the COVID-19 sort of got bigger, it sent out a notice that just basically said that we're ceasing all visits and we're ceasing all data collection during this time. And so for us, it's been absolutely about just respecting where the community is coming from, keeping in sort of ongoing conversation, not constant conversation, because they have a lot of other things on their minds, but ongoing conversations. And that ethics has actually only just been lifted. And so, you know, now it's all about re-engaging more physically, but I think that it'll be a long time before that becomes the norm, and we're not rushing out there, that's for sure. We are just staying in touch and seeing how everyone is and what they need.
Thanks, Vita. And it certainly does feel like we've been in physical isolation for such a long time. If we can wind the clock back, and I might bring you in here, Simon Bronitt, if we wind the clock back to when you started as Dean and head of the law school last year, I know that one of the first things you did was join a university delegation to the Gama Festival. Can you just take a short walk down memory lane, as it were, and share with us what you learned from that experience? Because I think part of the challenge around any conversation we have with reconciliation is about keeping an open mind and having new experiences. Are you able to talk us through some of the things you learned from that Gama experience with colleagues?
Thank you, Tim. Yeah, look, it was very early in my. In fact, it was before I actually started on the 1st of July. I got the invitation to join the delegation, and being new and enthusiastic, and actually not having too many things in my diary, which is one of the advantages of starting a job, is that you have a bit more time. I absolutely jumped at this opportunity. For me, it was an opportunity to, in a sense, understand this new institution I was joining, this new community, having worked previously at UQ, Griffith and ANU. And each institution is at a different stage of that journey, I should say. This was a great opportunity to meet colleagues working field, and Liam was one of the delegation as well. And I have to say, it was hugely important for me. As I wrote, I actually dug up my diary entry. Actually, we were encouraged to write a journal, so I might just read from that. So this is more authentic as to what my experience was. So I just said, my name is Simon Bronitt, and I'm a newcomer to an old land, and privileged to have the opportunity to learn more, to listen attentively and open my heart to Indigenous culture. I hope to see more of country, and I have to say it is beautiful country up there, and also to understand the intrinsic connections still persistent through the turmoil of colonisation to land. And I think I really understood that in that place more than anything, because the land actually got into every aspect of what we were doing. I mean, the red ochre earth was there. It was just, for 5 days, we were just living, breathing and embodying the land of the Yolngu people of North Arnhem Land. And they've been sharing and trading with peoples from different cultures for centuries. I learned so much more about how cosmopolitan the Indigenous peoples were, how open they were to different cultures. I attended the opening ceremony, and that was incredibly meaningful. It was young men dancing the crocodile and fire, strong and purposeful. And I have to say, the lead dancer, who was the grandson of Dr. Galawai Yungapingu, he was so eloquent, so passionate about the need for voice, treaty and truth. And I remember being slightly outraged that this brilliant speech he gave, they spent a lot of time in the news reporting the officials who gave, the speeches. And they edited this amazing young man's speech, and we actually had to try and track it down. I remember Gabrielle Russell tracking it down for us so we could actually have the full text. But he spoke in such a direct and defiant tone as he spoke to ministers and the Governor General's officials. He spoke of Makarrata and the need for reform and their impatience about that, and that something needed to be done. And then, of course, there is the corporate Australia flies in, all the large institutions, and they come in for the day and then fly out. They literally are FIFO, fly in, fly out. And at one level, they come in for the corporate dinner, and it's good to see all the big corporations there. But I also felt better they're there than they're not there. But at the same time, I felt, no, that isn't the way in which we should be engaging. We needed to have something much more ongoing and much more authentic. And I'm not romantic about that challenge. And I just looking at my reflection here, how we rebuild and reconstruct communities that have experienced some really serious levels of harm is a very large challenge. And it's a shared commitment. And I have to say, and my final thought was, as the dust washes off, and it took a while for that to wash off, I hope that some of the North Arnhem Land remains in my heart to remind me not to forget the strength and resilience of Indigenous peoples, and to recommit myself each and every day to the tasks ahead. Indifference is as much a problem as hostility. At least with hostility, you see it. Indifference is more problematic. And I suppose I've taken some of that into my role as the Associate Dean Indigenous. I took on the portfolio partly serendipitously because a colleague was going off on maternity leave. But I have to say it has to be integrated into every aspect of what we do. It isn't a separate portfolio. It is actually, that's why in my sense, being the dean is good, because I can see how that strategy of reconciliation and what strategies we're putting in place covers every aspect of the law school: education, research, engagement, impact. But look, GARMA was so much more than just an opportunity to learn more about North Arnhem Land. I got to know my colleagues. I got to meet future colleagues who've come and joined us since, and I do feel I carry a passion as a non-Indigenous person. Of course, I'm an Englishman who's, as I said, a newcomer to a very old land. I've been here 30 years now, but I feel I have a duty to do what I can to support Indigenous and Torres Strait Islander colleagues and students.
Thank you, Simon. And reminds me too of my own experience when I went to the GARMA Festival when I was commissioner at the Australian Human Rights Commission. Made an enormous impression on me, and I never managed to get some of that Arnhem Land dirt out of some clothes. Let's put it that way. It really does stick with you in a literal sense. We're going to turn now to some questions on Slido, and Stephanie's been curating through those questions. One of the top questions is, what are the practical ways non-Indigenous Australians can engage with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and cultures to progress reconciliation? I might throw to the panel on this one for their suggestions on some practical ways we can achieve reconciliation. Jaky, I might turn to you. I mean, what are some of the practical tips that you can offer or suggest to people who want to think through reconciliation?
One of the most important things people can do to engage with all of us as Indigenous people, not just in Australia but worldwide, is do what you're doing, which is ask questions. Ask questions. We love to talk. We love to have a yarn up. And actually, we're very friendly. The natives are very friendly. We really are keen to engage in conversations, big conversations. I like the responses to my calling it on Juukan Gorge. Yeah, ask those questions. Am I being too harsh on Rio? I bet most people in this audience would like to be pretty harsh as well. That's your heritage that's gone. I think everyone's feeling it. So I think stand with us, stand beside us as equals. I love that idea of we walk together, that bridge walk that is part of this celebration of this Reconciliation Week. I was there walking across the bridge with my friend Tony Lonsdale from Tinga, a Gamilaroi man, Anyuan, no, not Anyuan, Nilkuruma. And we had a pair of dingoes with us, Thelma and Louise. And the mood of the day was one of everybody coming together. That's what reconciliation is. I think that's the legacy of the bridge walk. And that skywriter who wrote "Sorry in the Sky," this is what I think. When it's okay to say sorry, and it's good to give us a chance to accept the apology and move on with you. So I think this is a really important act of reconciliation. Ask questions, talk to people, and let's walk side by side. Thanks,
Jaky. Vita, any thoughts on practical steps that people can take?
Yeah, I think it really goes back to, I don't think in totality, but I think it goes back to a fear of the unknown. And so in terms of practical ways of dealing with that, it's boning up on it, and just getting a little bit more familiar. I do really feel that within a lot of racism there is fear, and that fear comes from not understanding properly. So one step forward is to start understanding. I think a lot of things like institutional racism and systemic racism can be born of people sort of putting it to the bottom of the pile because it seems too hard, and that's about ignorance. And so I think, someone sort of mentioned earlier, sort of informing yourself. I think we need to get rid of the ignorance.
Thanks, Vita. Some more questions coming through. One of the other top ones was, what are your thoughts on the many migrants who only know Australia as a modern multicultural society and can't relate to reconciliation for past government actions? Simon, you've referred to yourself as a relative newcomer to Australia, though you have been here for 30-odd years. Any thoughts on that question?
Well, immediately it recalls a conversation nearly 30 years ago with Glenda Humes, who was one of my wonderful Indigenous students at ANU, who she was from Queensland, and she was a woman probably my age now, looking probably 50 at the time, and she was asked this question in a lecture theatre by very much about the multiculturalism policy was in the early 90s, was the ALRC, the Australian Law Reform Commission, produced a report on multiculturalism and the law. And the question was, well, how does multiculturalism relate to Indigenous people, and is it not set in conflict here? And in the generosity of a very wise woman who's seen a lot, including living under a pass system in Western Australia and growing up with her family on the move to avoid being stolen, she said, I don't expect you to understand all of my pain and the discrimination we have faced, but we don't have an objection or a concern about the importance of you seeking justice and equality for your people. And I thought it was a great. It recognises the importance of the special position of Indigenous people. But it's not an either or. It's that we should be seeking a society in which human dignity, respect for culture, and the multiplicity of cultures is there. But of course, First Nations people play a very significant role, and the issues are not always the same. And that goes to that point I think was generally made about the importance of education, understanding our history, and our history isn't told very well in our university curricula, to be honest. We want to tell more what stories we choose to tell about our founders is really important, and I think we need to tell some more about dispossession and resistance, and really unpack the myth of terra nullius. So I feel education and making sure that we get the full range of stories in law and justice is really important.
Thanks, Simon. And I think you make a very important point there about it not being an either or people not seeing issues as involving a trade-off. I'll just bring in another question that we've picked up on Slido. How can we push for land rights and societal decolonisation? Has the push for reconciliation trademark become diluted to the point of irrelevance? I might bring you in here, Liam. Simon just mentioned the need for ongoing efforts in the educational realm and teaching people about history. I wonder whether you can share with us whether there have been discussions within the Indigenous portfolio about decolonisation within the curriculum or within the university. Has that been something shaping the unfinished business action plan and you're thinking about the next Indigenous strategy and indeed the university strategy in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's one of the core pillars of the strategies that we're starting to move towards for research and education, understanding what it means to be of this land, and mapping that to the curriculum. So we're already seeing from Project Awarbit, an arts project, a couple of the science schools are already starting to map that within the curriculum of education. So it's the process is already started, and we're starting to really move through it, and it's really exciting, and there's more to come.
Thanks, Liam. Vita, is decolonisation something that's an issue that animates the conversations at the post?
A lot, actually. Yep. Yeah. I mean, I think we're actually part of a poach network throughout the country, and that there is, and a lot of the poach network work is around the decolonisation of academia and also the institution. And so specifically we've looked at it and we've got Carmen Parta on staff as our PhD student, and she's doing some amazing work in this and policy. I think it's all about the fact that we've got these massive systems that have been in place for a long, long time, you know, and University of Sydney is one of them, I think we're still going through the process of, I think it's unfinished business, as Liam said. Yeah.
Jaky, can I bring you in? You're a linguist. What role does language have in decolonisation and in ensuring that we achieve some progress in reconciliation?
Oh, did you agree for asking? Thank you. In the language of the Sydney area, Gadigal mob. I'm actually on Ngunnawal country, and I should have said to everybody I'm Ngarigu. So, role of language. All those snow bunnies, skiers out there, I think there's going to still be a ski season. If you go down to my country, I'll just tell you the power of language. When you look up and you see what people call Kozushko, named after a lovely Polish count who was a freedom fighter, terrific, has absolutely nothing to do with anything Ngarigu. Think to yourself, Kunama, Namaji, that's its real name in my language, in the language of Ngarigu mob. It means literally snowy mountains. How surprising. So, this is the power of language. What did we are the snow people. We are the ice mob. As in Australia, we have saltwater, freshwater, desert mob, and we are the ice mob. So you wouldn't know that if you didn't know that. I mean, in our language, everything is about snow and ice and living up in the high country. If you know Ngarigu, you know about the snow country. We're working to get our language going again. People need to be speaking our language. This is the same for all the languages of Australia. More than 400 languages. We've always been at least multinational anyway. We've got 400 plus separate socio-political groups who thought it was important enough not to speak the same language as the neighbour for at least 3,000 years. That's how long it takes to develop a new language. So 3,000 years at least of people being different people. So as you travel around Australia and you see signage up for place names, that's happening more and more. You hear people giving acknowledgements in their language, as Tim did this morning in Gadigal. Good on you, mate. This is what language is. It brings you into our culture. It brings you into our world, as all languages do.
Thanks, Jaky, albeit with a stutter or two along the way, but I'll work at it through practice. Practice makes perfect, or as one of my teachers used to say, perfect practice makes perfect. One last question from the Slido before we wrap up, and it's a question that might be directed at you again, Jaky. The question is, Jaky mentioned the need to accept the apology and move on together. We've heard the apology from Kevin Rudd, but we haven't heard the acceptance. Why is that?
Oh, well, I think that there is across Australia a sense amongst Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that the apology at least made part of the difference. It's, there's nothing quite like saying, I'm sorry. It does have a healing effect. But there needs to be a lot of other things that go along with an apology. There needs to be a way of people being able to rebuild their lives. This is a financial burden as well. So the Australian government needs to really think about it. I mean, we've just talked about languages. There's so little spent on supporting people to get their languages going again, to be able to share their languages. These are the Australian languages. How many people in Australia speak an Australian language who aren't Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander? As an Australian, if I stepped out of my Aboriginality for a moment, that would be, I would want to know a language of Australia. It's our country, So there's a lot that we need to do beyond an apology. And I think it's not that people haven't accepted the apology. It's just that people are waiting for what are the next steps? When are our people going to be the the least imprisoned people in Australia. You know, how can an Aboriginal woman die in custody because she didn't pay her parking tickets, because she was getting tickets for parking where she was taking her sick mother to get treatment and there was no other parking? Really? There are so many things about being Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander that are still, I guess, confronting in our society, and it needs to, for an apology to really work, we have to stop being people who are confronting. We have to stop being the people who scare people, who make people worried every time the word Aboriginal or the word Torres Strait Islander is raised. People start thinking, oh, what's going to be said next that's going to be a challenge to their own persona. You know, we don't dislike people coming in to this country or being migrants to this country. In fact, as I said, we have more than 400 languages. We've always distinguished ourselves. We love to have people coming in. So we need to move forward in this sort of a spirit of what a real apology is. Our countries were stolen. These lands, we are refugees, many of us in our own country, our own countries. But to move on, we need to be able to feel that others are with us in this path to renewing our cultures and our languages and keeping what we have powerfully alive and strong.
Thanks, Jaky. We're just about out of time, but I wanted to give the panelists one last chance to reflect on reconciliation today before we did wrap up. So a rapid 20-second round for each of the panelists. If you can tell us the one thing that you think we can all do to do our part on reconciliation. And Liam, I might kick off with you. What's the one thing that you'd recommend we do?
Just be a part of it. Get out there, introduce yourself, have the conversations, just be part of it.
Thanks, Liam. Vita, your one tip.
Community engagement.
Simon?
Keep practicing Gadigal language.
Thanks, Simon.
Use it as best you can. That would be it. I do it. Every acknowledgement I can, and it, even if you falter and stutter, have courage. It's our cultural value.
Indeed. And Jaky, final word to you.
Every day, think about something that's about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australia, both our cultures. Every day, think about something about us, something positive, preferably.
Yeah, and a great note on which to end. So thank you to everyone for joining us for this special culture forum. Just as we are on the cusp of wrapping up National Reconciliation Week, the values of openness and engagement, hopefully you'll get a better understanding of how they can shape our response to reconciliation and animate the work that we can do at the university community. So to our panellists, Liam Harte, Vita Christie, Jaky Troy and Simon Bronitt, a big thank you, and we look forward to continuing the conversation on the university's culture with you at our next Culture Forum.